PzKpfw tank destroyer based on the PzKpfw chassis and built in 3 main variants. Officially, only the L-48 armed vehicle was named the PzKpfw. The L-70 armed vehicle was named PzKpfw 70. The PzKpfw 70A was born from earlier German attempts to place the 7.5 cm L-70 into a PzKpfw turret. As this was not possible, another solution was proposed by the firm of Alkit. Their design simply reused a modified Vomag PzKpfw 70V superstructure armed with the 7.5 cm L-70 gun and placed it on a standard PzKpfw tank chassis. The result was a much taller and heavier vehicle than the PzKpfw 70V version. In theory, this would have sped up the whole production process, but in reality, only a small number were built by the end of the war. The terms Jagdpanzer and Panzerjäger were, according to Germany military terminology and concepts, essentially one and the same. After the war, however, the term Jagdpanzer would be used to describe fully enclosed tank destroyers, while Panzerjäger would be used for the open-topped vehicles. The initial designation for this vehicle was Sturmgeschütz auf Panzerkampfwagen via Fahrgestell. This designation was changed by Adolf Hitler himself on 18 July 1944 to a much simpler Panzer via Lange A. The capital A stood for the Alkit company that was responsible for its development. During its service life, other designations were also used, like the Panzer via LA from August 1944, Panzer via Lang A 7.5 cm PAK 42L70 from October 44, and finally Panzer via 70A from November 1944 onwards.
Im Schützenhaus ist Blasmusik mit Tanz, da tanzt die Lieselott mit ihrem Franz, da wird der kleine...
The PzKpfw 70A was designed to have a minimal modification to the PzKpfw Osp-J tank chassis. For this reason, the turret and the top of the hull were removed, and in their place, a new superstructure housing was added on top. The PzKpfw 70A was different in comparison to the other Jagdpanzers based on the PzKpfw. The most obvious difference is the overall shape of the new superstructure added atop the PzKpfw hull. The suspension and running gear were the same of those of the original PzKpfw, with no changes to their construction, similar to the PzKpfw 70V model. This model was also nose-heavy due to the added weight. For this reason, the front road wheels were prone to being rapidly worn out. In an attempt to solve this problem, most vehicles were equipped with 4 on both sides, steel-tired and internally sprung wheels from September 1944 onwards. The engine was a Maybach HL120 TRM, which produced 265 horsepower at 2,600 RPM. But according to sources, in Panzertrax number 9-2 Jagdpanzerwehr, the engine produced 272 horsepower at 2,800 RPM. The design of the engine compartment was unchanged. The maximum speed was 37 kilometers, 15 to 18 kilometers being on cross-country, with an operational range of 200 kilometers, with 470 liters of fuel. These vehicles were fitted with new flame-dampening exhausts and mufflers, Flammentöre. The engine and the crew compartments were separated by a fire-resistant and gas-tight armored firewall. The PzKpfw 70A's upper front hull armor plate was 80 millimeters thick, the side armor was 30 millimeters, the rear 20 millimeter, and the bottom was 10. The engine compartment design and armor were unchanged, with 20 millimeters all around and 10 millimeters of top armor. The upper superstructure frontal armor was 80 millimeters at a 50-degree angle, the sides were 40 millimeters at a 19-degree angle, the rear armor was 30 millimeters and the top was 20 millimeters. The front driver plate was 80 millimeters thick and placed at a 9-degree angle. The PzKpfw 70A could be equipped with an additional 5mm thick armor plating Schützen covering the sides of the vehicle. In practice, though, these would rarely last long and would simply fall off the vehicle during combat operations. Due to material shortages, by 1944, stiff wire mesh panels were used instead of armor plates. These were much lighter, and most sources claim that they provided the same level of protection as the solid type. It is often mentioned that Schützen were designed as a protection against shape-charged weapons, but they were actually designed to counter Soviet anti-tank rifle projectiles. One more line of protection was the possible application of Zimmerit anti-magnetic paste to counter magnetic anti-tank mines. But the use of this paste would be abandoned in the late stages of the war. In the hope of removing any extra weight at the front, most spare parts and ancillary equipment were moved to the rear engine compartment. These included things such as spare tracks, wheels, repair tools, the fire extinguisher, and the crew's equipment. Some vehicles had an armored and welded base for a 2-ton crane added on the superstructure roof. The PzKpfw 70A tank destroyer's main armament was the 7.5cm Stuck 42 L70 cannon, also known as the 7.5 Pak 42 L70. This gun was more or less the one used on the German Panther tank. The elevation of the 7.5cm Stuck 42 L70 was from -6 degrees to +15 degrees, and the traverse was 12 degrees on both sides. Due to the increased internal size, the PzKpfw 70A could carry more spare ammunition than its predecessors. Older sources noted that the total ammunition was counted at 60 rounds, while newer ones give a total of 90 rounds. The main gun was not placed at the vehicle's center, but was instead moved 20 centimeters to the right side because of the position of the gun sights. The main gun was not placed at the vehicle's center, but was instead moved 20 centimeters to the right side because of the positioning of the gun's sighting. The 80mm thick cast gun manlet acted as extra protection for the gun. A hydro-pneumatic equilibrator was provided for better gun balance, and iron counterweight was added at the end of the recoil guard. To avoid damaging the main gun while on the move, a heavy travel lock was provided. In order to free the gun operator had only to elevate the gun a bit and the travel lock would fall down. This allowed for a quick combat response and also avoided the need for a crew member to exit the vehicle in order to do it manually. The secondary support weapons consisted of a 7.92mm MG42 machine gun with some 1,200 rounds of ammunition, a 9mm MP40 machine gun, and a 7.92mm MP43-44 assault rifle. Unlike other German vehicles, a ball mount was not used on this vehicle. The machine gun port was instead protected by a movable armored cover. The machine gun was located to the vehicle's right side. The PzKpfw 70A vehicles were usually equipped with the famed Vorstaats P curved muzzle attachment for the MP43-44 assault rifle. The mounting for this weapon was placed on the loader's hatch door and was operated by him. It had a crew of 4, consisting of the commander, the gunner, the loader radio operator, and the driver. The PzKpfw 70A was to be allocated to units equipped with ordinary PzKpfw tanks, with the intent of increasing their firepower at longer ranges. According to initial plans, the first group of 68 vehicles was to be transported to the Eastern Front and then distributed to the PzKpfw-equipped units. As only 5 vehicles were ready by September 1944, these were instead given to the Führer Begleit Brigade together with a group of 17 PzKpfw tanks. The group of 17 vehicles were to be dispatched to the Eastern Front, but it actually arrived in mid-October 1944. And by the end of the month, units that received the Panzer via 70A were the 3rd Panzer Division, 17th Panzer Division, and 25th Panzer Division, which had 17 vehicles each, while the 24th Panzer Division had 13, and the 13th Panzer Division only had 4. In response to the invasion in the West in late 1944, 2 Abteilungen with 45 vehicles each were formed and attached to the Panzer Regiment Großdeutschland and the 2nd Panzer Regiment. The Panzerwehr 70A Abteilung should have had 45 vehicles divided into 3 companies, each equipped with 14 vehicles with 3 additional in the command Abteilung. These 2 units were never fully formed due to the general lack of Panzerwehr 70A vehicles. The 2nd Panzer Regiment was supplied with 11 and Großdeutschland with 38 Panzerwehr 70A vehicles. By the end of 1944, Panzerabteilung 208 was formed. It was supplied with 14 Via 70As and 31 Panzerwehr tanks. It was organized into 3 companies, one of which was fully equipped with the Panzerwehr 70A. At this time, 10 Panzerwehr 70A were also allocated to the 7th Panzer Division. In January 1945, the last Panzer units to receive 14 Panzerwehr 70A vehicles were the 24th Panzer Division and the Panzer Brigade 103. From January 1945 onwards, the Panzerwehr 70A were allocated to Sturmgeschütz units only, mainly in the hope of increasing their firepower against enemy armored vehicles. Around 13 Stug brigades were equipped with 3 vehicles each, for example 341, 394, 190, 276, etc., while fewer 210, 244, 300, and 311 had only 4 vehicles. Only 2 Stug brigades received larger numbers. The Sturm Artillery Lehr Brigade 111 had 16 vehicles, and Sturm Brigade Großdeutschland had 31. Thanks to its thick armor and strong gun, the Panzerwehr 70A could be an effective weapon. An example of this comes from Stug Brigade 311. During a Soviet attack on Breslau, mid-April 1945, Stug Brigade 3, 3 Stug 3, and 1 Panzerwehr 70A managed to destroy around 10 ISU-152 vehicles. The next day, Brigade 311 again engaged the Soviet armored advance. On this occasion, the Soviets lost 25 armored vehicles, of which 13 were reported to be destroyed by the lone Panzerwehr 70A. It is unclear if these values and those following are just claimed kills or verified kills. Another example comes from Panzerabteilung 208, which was heavily engaged in Hungary from early January 1945 on. On the first day of 1945, Panzerabteilung 208's combat strength was 25 Panzerwehr with 21 combat ready and 10 Panzerwehr 70As, with 7 being fully operational. During the heavy Soviet assault, 8th January, on the German position around the village Iza, located in Slovakia near the Hungarian border, 208 managed to destroy 24 enemy tanks, of which 7 were credited to the Panzerwehr 70A, with the loss of 3 Panzerwehr and 1 Panzerwehr 70A. The next day, 4 more Soviet tanks were destroyed, followed by 7 more, of which 5 were reported to be destroyed by the VS 70A model in 208's counterattack. On 22nd January, 208, with a force of 25 Panzers and Panzerwehr 70A, made a counterattack against the Soviet 6th Guards tank army, where the enemy lost 9 tanks. 208 lost most of its equipment during another failed attack on 19th February 1945. Of course, there is always a chance that in both cases these numbers were exaggerated for propaganda purposes. The few ViA-70A that did reach the front line were simply overrun by the vast numbers of enemy tanks. Most were simply abandoned or destroyed by their crew to the general lack of fuel and spare parts. The few produced ViA-70A that did reach the front line were simply overrun by the vast numbers of enemy tanks. Most were simply abandoned or destroyed by their crew due to the general lack of fuel and spare parts. The German army was not overly satisfied with the ViA-70A's performance. In a report made on 15 January 1945 by the General Inspector die Panzertruppen, the ViA was deemed as non-combat serviceable and that the ViA tank production should be increased. Today, one ViA-70A, serial number 120539, is known to have survived the war and can be found at the French Musée des Blindes at Saumur. It was hit and damaged by Sherman tank fire at close range, but was still in running condition when it was captured by the French resistance army.